Book of Genesis in the Old Testament, the book of Genesis and chapter 18. We have for some time now been walking with Abraham on his road to bold faith. And today we come to one of those high water marks in his life when God comes and when God visits with him. A visit from God. How many of you know that when company is coming, some preparation has to be made? How many of you know that when company shows up unexpected, that you're never quite ready for them to come? How many of you know that some company you'll be glad when they're gone? A short visit sometimes feels like an eternity, but company's coming. Abram, in chapter 17, had a vision. God said,
I'm going to bless you with a son.
your wife Sarah is going to have a baby. And for you to enjoy this, you've got to enter into the covenant. And Abraham obeyed God. And he circumcised both himself, his son, and all the males in his household as a symbol of his faith. Obedience will bring a visit from God. Mark it down, write it on the doorpost of your mind, and just say, disobedience will shut God out. The end of chapter 15, first verse of chapter 16, God is silent for 13 years because of disobedience. But when he obeyed God, suddenly God came to his house. Obedience will bring God to your door. God's coming. Most of us, if we knew that God was going to visit, I'm not sure that some of us would want him to come. Just very honestly with you, I hear people every now and again say, boy, I wish God would do with me like he did Moses. Scare you to death? You're not really sure that you want God to come. You'd have to make too many changes if God came. I heard about a little situation where a family had invited the preacher and the evangelist and several other people into the home. It was for a revival time. They were having meal in the home, and it was August, and it was hot, and she had labored all day in the kitchen trying to get the meal together. Now it's on the table, and they sit down, and the lady said to her young son, "Son, will you ask the blessing on the food?" He said, "Mama, I don't know what to say." He said, "Well, just say what you've heard me say." He said, "Dear God, why did I invite so many people on a hot day like this?" A lot of changes made if God came to visit. Little poem I came across that says, if Jesus came to your house, would you meet him at the door with arms outstretched to welcome? Or would you have to change your clothes before you let him in? Or hide some magazines and put the Bible where they'd been? Would you hide your worldly music and put some hymn books out? Could you let Jesus walk right in, or would you have to rush about? And I wonder, if the Savior spent a day or two with you, would you go right on doing the things you always do? Would you go right on saying the things you always say? Would life for you continue as it does day by day? Would you take Jesus with you everywhere you'd planned to go? Or would you maybe change your plans for just a day or so? Would you be glad to have him meet your closest friends, or would you hope they'd stay away until his visit ends? Would you be glad to have him stay forever on and on, or would you sigh with great relief when at last he was gone? It might be interesting to know the things that you would do if Jesus came in person to spend some time with you. Company's coming. And Abram has the blessing that few others have ever known, and that is for God to visit his house. Look at chapter 18, verse 1. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground and said, My Lord. See, he knew it was God. The Bible tells us that many entertain angels unaware. But here's a man who is walking so with God that he knew him when he showed up. My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. And the next verses tell us how that he ministered to him with water and with food. Company is coming. Notice with me, first of all, that he was resting. It's the eastern part of the world. It's a hot desert region. It's that time of the day when people with good sense get in out of the sun, and he's sitting in the door of his tent trying to catch any breeze that might be passing by. But when God comes, everything that is sometimes even practical is forgotten. There are some demands that are made upon your life that you absolutely must do in order to walk with God. So he looks up, and here he sees the 3 men. He jumps up and starts running to meet him. Now, if I know anything about life, I can hear Sarah right now. Hey, you old man, you're going to kill yourself running out there. Hey, but when God comes, it don't make any difference what anybody thinks. When God comes, it doesn't make any difference what trial it may put on your own life. When God comes, the only thing that's important is you get to where God is. Has God passed by you lately? By the way, God's here today. I know he is. I met him early this morning here in this building, and I asked him if he would to stay, and he agreed that he would. And I've asked him to put angels all around this place, and I tell you, you may not be able to see them, but they are here. God's in this place, and he's passing by your place to speak with your heart. Company's come to visit with you. He was resting, but he was quickly received. You see, God's visit is never an inconvenience, and it demands everyone's attention. And so though he is resting, and it's a time when you would think that he wouldn't get up to go, still God knocked at his door, and he ran to where he was. Would you be glad if God came? If he came this Sunday morning and walked down the aisle, would you be glad that God came? A friend of mine, state of Florida, First Baptist Church, Orlando, Jim said that one Sunday morning he was seated on the platform. The building was filled, an auditorium that seats somewhere amounting about 3,000. And he said, as I sat there, suddenly I looked up and I saw a guy come through the door, had on a t-shirt, cut off pants, barefooted, long hair, and said he just walked down the aisle. No usher spoke to him, nobody stopped him, and he just stopped right up next to the front, folded his arms, and started looking. He said, well, I thought I ought to just at least find out what was going on. And he walked down to him and he said, sir, I'm Jim Henry, pastor of this church. He said, I know, I'm Jesus. He said, well, Jesus